Hello and welcome to another episode of But Have You Heard About Conspiracy Theory Edition? Dun, 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 dun. As always, I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined by Matt.
Hello.
So, this is a near and dear to me conspiracy theory, or subject in general, because it's about sports.
Mm-hmm.
And I love sports.
I've already been told about this.
This is like the first time, because I was so excited that I was like ready to talk about it, that I wanted to tell you, because I'm the type of person who can't keep secrets when it's something I'm like super excited about. Like if I buy somebody a gift, I tell them about it. I tell my old work wife, Roxanne, told her like when I got her birthday and her Christmas gift, and it was like November.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what this is, but let's tell the at-home audience. Today's conspiracy theory is that Michael Jordan's first retirement was a secret suspension for gambling from the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason you're doing this is because Michael Jordan was in the movie Space Jam. That is literally the only reason we're doing this.
Why do you have to be like that?
That's just the fact that you like Space Jam.
Sir, I don't like Space Jam. I love Space Jam. Mm-hmm. The second Space Jam is okay. It's not Michael Jordan and the introduction of Lola Bunny good, but it's still a good movie.
The new one?
Yeah, it's fine.
That's fine.
It's fine. It's a nice family movie. You get Don Cheadle, okay? What more do you need other than Don Cheadle?
Yeah.
And he's a villain. You don't ever get to see him be a villain. It's freaking Rhodey. Mm-hmm. And it is Michael Jordan is the GOAT. And growing up, I was a huge fan of Looney Tunes. And so also...
Who wasn't?
Who wasn't a fan of Looney Tunes, especially in the 90s? They had this whole resurgence.
Mm-hmm. They really did.
So I grew up, near a Six Flags. Granted, it was Astroworld. But we got Looney Tunes merchandise everywhere. When Space Jam came out, we had Lola Bunny. I wanted to be Lola Bunny, which was really weird. Like looking back at it or whatever. But it doesn't matter. We were talking about Michael Jordan. And the whole reason his first retirement happened was because it was a secret suspension for gambling. And as a child, I didn't even think about it. And all I remember is that there was all this like Chicago Bulls merchandise everywhere. And living in Houston, I was like, oh no, home team, you got to root for the Rockets. Because before that, I didn't have a basketball team. So I was just anti-Chicago Bulls, but not anti-Michael Jordan because I absolutely was in love with Space Jam.
I thought the retirement angle was for Space Jam, the movie. I thought that was the conspiracy, was that he wanted to make a movie or wanted to get into movie making or something, and this was the plot that coincided with his retirement, and it seemed too perfect.
Well, then why would he have ever played baseball? Like that was the red herring. Okay, well, you know what? Let's get into this, okay? Before we like start going off on tangents and getting in the weeds. Let's go. So, let's set the backstory up before we dive right into this. In case you've never seen the critically acclaimed and life-changing movie Space Jam, Michael Jordan was the basketball player of the 90s.
Fact.
He was a shock to not just the Chicago Bulls by leading them to 2 three-peat NBA championships, but he changed how the game of basketball was played, really. The drive, the weight of a whole city on your shoulders, how one player's determination can carry your team through so many challenges, and how you only needed Scottie Pippen to accomplish it all. Because if he didn't have Scottie, he didn't win anything. Just FYI. We just all know that. It's a thing. Anyways, we aren't here to debate the GOAT issue with him and LeBron. And Matt would only be able to talk about which Space Jam movie is better. But we can say that overall Jordan changed the game and made millions around the world want to be like Mike. That's why it was a huge surprise to many that on October 6th...
Mike is a different movie.
That's why it was a huge surprise to many that on October 6, 1993, at the age of just 30, and at the peak of his basketball career, Jordan would retire. I throw this in there, the fact that LeBron James is nearing 40 and is playing in, like, I don't know how many, like, whatever year this is, postseason, and he's, like, a few wins away from going to his whatever conference championship game for the Lakers. So, go talk or whatever. Everybody's
athletes are lasting longer in the game than they ever have. I don't know why. It's just a thing for some reason.
Yeah.
You got dudes like
Tom Brady.
Brett Favre was special. Was in the game for very long. He might have been the exception for his age at the time. But then you had dudes like Brady. Yeah. He just won't leave.
They won't leave. So, and I think LeBron has made it clear that he wants to play with his son, and once he gets to play a year with his son, wherever his son is drafted to is where he's going to go, or, whatever, however that's going to happen. And I'm just like, that's really cool. But again, We are talking about Michael Jordan, not LeBron James. So, over the years, there's been speculation that Jordan's decision was less of a choice and more his end of a tacit agreement with the NBA. As the uncorroborated theory goes, the NBA was concerned about Jordan's gambling ties and wanted him to take a break. Jordan voluntarily stepping away would serve as a face-saving measure for all parties involved. Perhaps the league didn't want to publicly punish Jordan, the most marketable athlete in American history, and give fans a reason to question their loyalty to the NBA overall. Jordan, who earned approximately $30 million a year in endorsements alone during the early 90s, was likewise invested in avoiding irreparable harm to his brand. Why would the face of the league on the best team in the league, who was known for his enormous competitive drive and his desire to be the best ever, suddenly retire in the middle of his prime? According to Jordan, it was because he wanted to retire. His father had been murdered and was a huge driving force in his career.
Wait, what?
You didn't know that Michael Jordan's dad was murdered?
No.
So...
How do I not know this?
You didn't watch The Last Dance with me like the 20 times I've watched it?
I don't watch fucking Netflix crap or whatever. I watched
Michael Jordan's
bits and
dad.
pieces of
Okay,
it.
so quick catch up for people who didn't know that Michael Jordan's dad was murdered. So Michael Jordan's dad was driving. So this is obviously in the 90s. There are cell phones, but not like widely used cell phones. Michael Jordan's dad is driving his car, and he doesn't make it to a plane to get to Chicago. And Jordan's like reps are like, hey, you know, he's not here. Jordan's like, that's really weird, you know, whatever. And it's a week or so later, they find his car abandoned. And then a couple weeks after that, they find his body in a lake. And it was literally like a crime of convenience where I guess like maybe his car had died on the side of the road, or he had been stopped on the side of the road for some reason after playing golf with friends, I think. And he was coming back like before he went to his house to go get his stuff to go on the plane to leave to go see Jordan. And he must have got stopped on the side of the road. I mean, I could be also totally wrong, but I'm pretty, like, I know that his dad was murdered and his car was found abandoned. And I believe he was found in like a river.
That's
near.
fucked up.
Yeah. So thinking about that happens right before, right after he wins, I think it's right after he wins his third championship game. And it's right after, it's during that off season. So that's all like weighing on his head or weighing on his shoulders and everything. But anyways, so his father has been murdered and his dad was a huge driving force in his career. Mm-hmm. Jordan then went on to play baseball, a dream he talks about in the documentary Last Dance that only his father and maybe one other person knew he was planning to do that season. So in the season before Jordan's father died, he had already been talking about like, I want to retire and go play baseball because that's what my dad wanted me to do. That's what I want to do. I want to be like my dad and play baseball.
Oh, that makes sense now.
But if we don't believe that he retired to play baseball and think it was because of something else, well, let's look at some of the possible facts that lead many avid and casual sports fans to this conspiracy, that it's all about gambling. Mm-hmm. In 1992, after winning his second championship with the Chicago Bulls, obviously, Jordan was called to testify in the criminal trial of James Buller, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, to explain why Buller, a convicted drug dealer, was in possession of a Jordan-signed personal check of $57,000, which sounds like still a lot of money to me, but like at the time, like I'm sure that's like a lot of money, but now if you're like, a celebrity gave a $57,000 check, that's not that much. But whatever, anyways.
Boule.
Maybe it is Boule.
I don't know.
I don't know how to pronounce anybody's name. That's how life is. Jordan claimed that the $57,000 check was a business loan, but under oath, he admitted that it was a payment for gambling losses for a single weekend in October of 1992. Mr. Boulere was no stranger to federal crimes, but Jordan was. And this was the first we as a nation heard anything about Jordan that wasn't about how great of a player he was. To put it charitably, Jordan had misrepresented the nature of his gambling activity and debts. As some journalists, go into detail, Jordan originally claimed that he had loaned the money to Buller, only to later admit the money was to extinguish a gambling debt. So he was kind of caught. He was under oath. He's not going to lie under oath. So, 1992.
Why are people with money so freaking stupid?
Well, I think everybody has vices in life, and Jordan's is gambling. And they talk about this in The Last Dance. Maybe I should have made you watch it before we did this. But in The Last Dance, he doesn't care how much the buy-in for a game is, whether it's $20,000 or $1. He wants your money in his pocket. That's his driving force. Mm-hmm. And like that's like his competitive edge. So anytime people would like say things about his game or him playing, he would go out and just destroy them if they'd had a good game or they had said anything about the man. So 92 is our first brush with Jordan not being the perfect poster child of life. 1993. Yeah. 1993 was no better for him on the gambling front. It started on May 24th when Jordan famously visited an Atlantic City casino the night before Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals. He was playing in New York, Madison Square Garden. That is not that long, I guess, of a drive from Atlantic City or to Atlantic City. I've only been to Atlantic City once for a conference for work like years ago, but we came from Pennsylvania, or like it was Philly, so it was fine. But anyways, the Bulls lost that game to the Knicks. And New York newspapers reported that Jordan was spotted gambling until the early morning on the like before the game on the 24th. He still claims he was back at the hotel much earlier in the evening than what has been reported by newspapers. Jordan responded to the coverage of this whole illicit gambling thing and him going to Atlantic City with his dad to go blow off some steam with a total media blackout. His silence lasted until June 9th, so that's not a full month, but at least a couple weeks. But when you're like the number one player in the league and you go on to win that and you give like no interviews, like that's crazy. Again, his silence lasted until June 9th, and he donned sunglasses to speak with Rashad, who is a friend of his and also an interviewer. At that time, San Diego businessman Richard Esquinas, again, things I should probably have learned to pronounce people's names, doesn't really matter.
Esquinas.
Esquinas. Announced he was releasing his book, Michael and Me, Our Gambling Addiction, My Cry for Help. I love the title. In the book, he talks about how Jordan lost about $1.25 million in golf betting. So we went from $57,000 to $1.25 million in a year. So, well, Michael Jordan has always possessed supernatural media savvy. So his interview with Ahmad Rashad, again, friend, during the 1993 NBA Finals was particularly bizarre. The subject was gambling, and the normally witty and charismatic Jordan appeared flustered, even though he was being questioned by one of his closest friends. Odder still was Jordan's attire. Again, those sunglasses on when he's doing that interview. You're like, you don't want to make eye contact with anyone. Are you crying? What exactly is going on? So Esquinas, whatever his name is,
Esquinas,
was a San Diego businessman who had built a relationship with Jordan around golf. In early June, right in the middle of Jordan's media blackout, Esquinas announced that he was publishing this tell-all. He alleged that the superstar lost $1.252 million to him during a 10-day golfing binge, and that Jordan negotiated to have the debt reduced to $300,000. However, in the book and more current interviews of the time, Esquinas claimed that Jordan had still only paid him $200,000 and that he was waiting on the final $100,000. When Bob Costas, who's a notorious sports personality and interviewer, interviewed Esquinas at halftime during Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals, Esquinas said his motivation behind the book was to, quote, expedite my recovery and reach out and help Michael Jordan, end quote. To help bolster his claims, Esquinas presented NBC with 2 checks from Jordan totaling $200,000 as evidence. However, he could not prove that Jordan owed him the 7-figure debt. Quote, there is no hard evidence that says it was $1.252 million. Ultimately, it would come down to Michael versus my word, end quote. So obviously, Jordan has paid this man money. Well, let me get a little bit more into it. So Esquinas wasn't entirely convincing when pressed about the timing of his book announcement, which came in the middle of the playoffs and soon after the Atlantic City controversy. A lot of people had seen this book as it was becoming manufactured, and they knew that there were inquiries being made and that a leak was about to happen about the book. So if there's a leak about to happen, you're going to share before somebody else gets a scoop on yourself. It should also be noted that the book was also self-published, because ain't nobody going to print that about Jordan. Convincing or not, the interview lured Jordan out of his silence. He released a statement through his agent the next day addressing Esquinas' claims. I have played golf with Richard Esquinas with wagers made between us. Because I did not keep records, I cannot verify how much I won or lost. I can assure you that the levels of our wages was substantially less than the preposterous amounts that have been reported. 4 days later, Jordan would sit down with Rashad to address the matter on camera. In The Last Dance, Jordan's contemporary take on the situation sounds no different from his statement in 1993. I'm actually playing golf with people all the time. And if they want to gamble, we gamble. The character of
Like
those
Bill
individuals, yeah, like Bill Murray and Larry Bird and Wayne Knight. The characters of those individuals, I found out later that what kind of people I was playing with. I learned that lesson, but the act of gambling, I didn't do anything wrong. And honestly, I mean, it's a gray area. I feel like he absolutely gambled with this man. He admitted to it. The amount, the timing of the book is a little, However, the book was going to come out, and I think that we were finally getting a taste of the fact that Jordan has gambling problems, or that Jordan is a gambler.
Right.
But he had the ability to finance it.
But is this gambling thing like a vent for him losing his dad, or is this something
this was way before.
Pre-dad?
Pre-dad.
Okay.
In 2005, Jordan discussed his gambling with Ed Bradley of 60 Minutes and admitted that he made reckless decisions. Jordan stated, "Yeah, I've got myself into situations where I would not walk away, and I've pushed the envelope. Is that compulsive? Yeah, it depends on how you will look at it. Yes. If you're willing to jeopardize your livelihood and your family, then yeah." When Bradley asked him if he was gambling ever got to the level where it jeopardized his livelihood or family, Jordan replied no. In 2010, Ron Shelton, director of Jordan Rides the Bus, said that he began working on the documentary believing that the NBA has suspended him, but that research convinced him that it was nonsense. So we have a documentarian that also went in and basically kind of tried to prove this wrong. Or like tried to prove that it happened because of the gambling, but also After the Bulls won their third championship in 1993, the NBA launched an investigation into Jordan's gambling problems to check whether he had violated any league rules. Gambling, provided it complies with the law, is not automatically prohibited by league policy. While state laws vary on permissible forms of gambling, there are numerous ways to gamble within the confines of most state laws. This is generally true of lotteries, scratch tickets, card games, and slot machines. Mm-hmm. The problem for an NBA player is if his gambling is related in any way to the league's games. Mm. To divert for a second, that's why a ref was not only fired but prosecuted by the FBI because he shared information with bookies and sports bettors. But back to the story. Under Article 35F of the league constitution, any player who directly or indirectly wagers money or anything of value on the outcome of any game played by a team in the NBA is subject to a fine, suspension, or expulsion.
There's a league constitution? What the fuck is that?
Of course there is.
What the...
Because
I don't care about sports.
Right.
So what the fuck is a league constitution?
I think it'd be the same thing as an employee handbook.
So it's just like
rules.
It's guidelines that you should be following, things that you shouldn't be doing, and things that you should be doing based off of you being an employee of the NBA.
Yep, moral contracts, all of that stuff.
Yeah. It's like you don't disclose customer information if you work for
HIPAA,
or OSHA, that type of stuff. Things that you should be doing and things that you shouldn't be doing.
Yes.
And he was doing the things that you shouldn't be doing.
However, it wasn't necessarily outlined that what he did was wrong. He was just gambling, but they launched an investigation to see if he was doing any sort of gambling when it came to basketball games.
All right. So he's pushing the boundaries, basically, of what is appropriate and not appropriate.
And I couldn't find anything that said that they came to a conclusion before he retired either. But so this portion of the league constitution is expressed in players' contract and is incorporated by referees in the league's collective bargaining agreement with the National Basketball Players Association, so the NBPA. Well, it was only 4 months later, so after this investigation launched, not concluding, I believe, that Jordan stunned the entire world by suddenly retiring from professional basketball. During this press conference, journalists were obviously there because they had warning the night before that some shit was going down. And Michael being Michael, he allowed them to ask questions at the end because he really is a wonderful person to interview. If you've ever seen any of his interviews, he's very open, very honest, very charismatic. And so when he had that media blackout, it was weird.
I don't know. I feel like every time I've seen, and I don't watch sports very often. Every time you see an athlete.
No, but we're talking about just Jordan. Just Jordan.
Jordan's a different character.
And that's what I'm saying. He made it he probably was he's the gold standard.
So many interviews that he actually had someone teach him how to do interviews.
I think he's naturally charismatic.
I don't know.
And I think he uses his aggression that he may have on on his colleagues on the field, like on the court.
In an interview?
No, like I think because he uses all of his aggression out on the court, on the ball during the game, or even practices, that he doesn't have anything left to be like that to the interviewers. Like he's not Marshawn Lynch, who literally would sit there and say, "I'm here so I don't get fined" during interviews. Mm-hmm. Because if you didn't go to do the interviews, you got fined, and he would answer every question with, "I'm here so I don't get fined." I love Marshawn Lynch. He's wonderful. But in response to a journalist's hypothetical question about whether Jordan considered the possibility that, after a year away, he'd miss the game more than he anticipated and would want to come back, Jordan responded that while he was pretty sure he would miss the NBA, quote, "to come back would be different," end quote. But Jordan stressed that he was, quote, "not making this a never issue," and suggested 5 years down the line, if the urge comes back, if the Bulls have me, if David Stern lets me back in the league, I may come back. Did you catch that, Matt? Mm-mm. If David Stern lets me back in the league. Mm. It's the back part of the quote that gets people.
Is he the bad guy from Space Jam?
No. David Stern. If David Stern lets me back. David Stern is the commissioner of the NBA, or he was.
Okay, at the time.
At the time. He was the one who basically brought the NBA, like there's a couple different conspiracy theories and controversies under his belt. However, he brought the NBA back from like a brink of possible bankruptcy and like losing attendance, losing fans.
So he's like Jesus.
He's not Jesus.
He's the second coming of the NBA, basically.
Sure. You know what? If that's how you want to think about that, Matt,
he saved the NBA.
David Stern didn't. I think Michael Jordan saved the NBA.
So, Space
Jam saved the NBA.
Michael Jordan is Jesus. And
hold
this
on.
other guy
Reggie Miller called him Black Jesus, and that's how he would refer to him. So I believe he could be Jesus.
So this other dude, what's his name?
David Stern.
David Stern. He's like who?
He is in charge of everything in the NBA.
So he's like God.
Oh my gosh. Back to that quote.
Michael Jordan's his son.
No, stop that. So back to the quote. If David Stern lets me back, like Jordan and his whole situation is a cash cow. Like why would you not let him back? Was he not going to be allowed back for a whole season to prove a point or to let the gambling stories die down? When he ultimately came back to the Bulls, the gambling stories from the years prior didn't really come with him. So it leads one to think that maybe it really was a thing. Mm. So when the phrase, if David Stern lets me back in the league, I may come back, has ever been brought up to David Stern in interviews, he denies that he suspended Jordan due to gambling. In addition, the Bulls icon, aka Jordan, revealed later why he retired in 1993, saying it had nothing to do with his betting. The folklore, the urban legend that I sent him away because he was gambling, ridiculous, Stern has said. No basis in fact, whatever. I could bang on the table and say it's a calumny, a slanderous lie, or whatever. It's just not true. Never was and never will be, no matter how many times people ask the question. So back to Jordan. He was mentally and physically exhausted after winning 3 straight championships. He carried people on his back. He literally melded that team together, was the villain as well as the hero, depending on who you talk to. He also was heartbroken after losing his dad a few months after his 3rd championship and had zero energy or motivation to play basketball anymore. Him going to play baseball is more of a need to change and challenge himself. Quote, I didn't retire because he kicked me out or they suspended me for 1.5 years. That is not true. There is no truth to that. I needed a break, My father just passed and I retired. I retired with a notion that I wasn't going to come back, end quote. I personally think that these rumors about him being suspended would have had merit if he didn't unretire. He unretired twice.
Right.
And the idea that a secret like this is, still a secret in the NBA of all leagues. I just don't think that's possible.
It just seems desperate, almost. It's like, why retire more than once? I mean, I know like that. I know people like that at work, but it's because they're indisposable, I suppose. So if people in the NBA thought that Michael Jordan was a very good asset and they wouldn't let him retire, I could see that. But not him being like, you know what? I fucked up. I want to come back. I just don't see that. Like if you say you're done, you're done. But if someone comes it's like the mob. They drag you back in and you're forced to be there, but they give you a sweet deal in the process. I can see that.
Jordan he needed the change.
I mean, unless he was in some sort of like financial trouble and he was like, "Oh shit, I need money again."
No,
like, I'm going to be able to get out of it.
He still had his endorsements. He's still an athlete, and from what everyone has ever said about him playing baseball is that he just needed another season. He actually was good.
So this is where this conspiracy kind of stems from, is that everyone states that he, quote unquote, retired, but it was just a cover for him being suspended during a gambling issue, and they didn't want to make gambling issue the spotlight of his absence.
Well, not even so. It's all because that instead of they were 4 months into this investigation, and then he retires. Mm-hmm. So it could have been that they actually came to the conclusion that he violated league rules.
Right.
We need to suspend him, and they were like, "Look, we need you to retire. You can come back after a season and a half." Like that's what this suspension should be.
But they didn't. Is there like a permanent record thing for suspensions? Like if you were suspended?
Well, that's the whole thing, is that the NBA, the suspension would just be that he didn't get paid.
But retiring does that anyways. So like
exactly.
What does
that's
the label,
what I'm saying.
What does the
label
even matter?
Is the saving face.
It doesn't seem like that matters though.
It's like when a politician retires before they can get ousted in a vote.
Okay. Or it's like being dishonorably discharged before.
But you're getting honorably discharged versus quitting, or like getting let out of the military, like serving your contract.
I could see.
It would be honorable versus dishonorable.
Yeah, I could see wanting the label.
The label
less derogative and more enlightening, I suppose.
And having the whole phrase of "if David Stern will let me" gives pause to the fact that you're like, did he say that as like he didn't mean what he meant? Mm. Like, that's not what he maybe meant.
The context of that sentence could be misinterpreted.
I think it's like a relationship is what he was going off of.
It's more of like a joke,
because it's one of those things like, if you were to, like, if we were just in a dating stage.
If my mom will let me.
Yeah. And it's, or even like, if my mom will let me back in the house, or if, she'll let me back in after I've been out all night.
Right.
In that type of like situation. That's what I feel like it's alluding to.
I'm sure that they were in a fairly personal relationship, given that he was the best player ever.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they had their a personal relationship and not just a business relationship. Yeah.
They have to, because of what he did for the league. They have to have a good relationship.
And he was his father. Because
back to the story at hand. I think Jordan was planning on retiring. Even though he was at the peak of his career, he's just tired. Like, I don't think he wanted to go out intentionally losing or looking like he's not at his prime. And what I think is that, Jordan wanted to, once he got out, or once he like thought that he was going to retire after the end of that third season, or like maybe even just take a step back. I think with his father's passing, that was the nail on the coffin. Mm-hmm. But I think deep down, it really is his dad passing that like shook him to his core. And I mean, he worked with his personal trainer to get into shape for baseball and then to go back to basketball. And so when he originally came back to basketball, he just was not on the endurance streak whatsoever. So I think deep down, if he had retired or he had been suspended, he would have kept up his normal regime. Mm-hmm. Whatever that may be for basketball versus baseball. But because he really was going to go all in on baseball,
is he even good at baseball?
Yes. I literally just talked about this.
Space Jam did not.
Space Jam did not make it
seem so.
Because he'd also left baseball by the time he was making Space Jam. It didn't take that long to make it. But he was not horrible at baseball, given time, given a little bit more coaching. Because it's not like he had been playing baseball for the amount of time he'd been playing basketball. He did play baseball through high school, and he thought he was going to go play baseball in college, and he wound up playing basketball instead and being really freaking good.
Right. I'm sure he explored his different avenues in his younger days.
But I think that this really has no merit when it comes to he was suspended for gambling. I think it was like a shitty PR nightmare for himself, but I don't think that it had anything to do with gambling. What about you?
I don't know. There's some semblance of truth to this conspiracy. We're not talking like, aliens or fucking whatever. This is basically just corruption, if it's true, which is a fairly, human thing, being corruptible or you miss your steps, so
yeah,
it's plausible, but there's more stating and evidence stating that this isn't true, so you're more inclined to believe that it's not. But the fact that there's way too many human elements going on here, and humans are horrible, that this is a much more plausible scenario being fact. And it is weird. Has anyone else ever pulled these types of stunts before? Mm-hmm.
Well, there's been other people who've been suspended for gambling.
Okay.
Mostly in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so, Michael Jordan, do you think he was suspended for gambling, yeah or nay?
No, he was suspended because he wanted to do Space Jam.
Okay.
Or he retired.
He retired for Space Jam.
For Space Jam.
Because we had to get a whole plot line for Space Jam, and that made more sense. And going and doing baseball made way more sense than being suspended for gambling and then having to go play with Looney Tunes to then get you back in the league.
I don't know. The movie slot and the baseball slot, like his dad dying and all that, all those elements stacking on top of each other makes a hell of a lot more sense than unproven gambling stuff.
But it is proven gambling stuff.
But he didn't gamble on his games. Yes, that's
correct.
That's a fact.
Correct. Well, also, I don't think that they ever talked about...
Are they just being... Are they scrutinizing him more just because he's the best player and they don't want it to have any possibility of a controversy?
Probably.
More than likely that it's that. And they're like, you know what? Instead of inviting the idea of a controversy, let's just do this and keep it under wraps and blah, blah, blah. And the fact that gambling was even in remote proximity to this, people just go on crazy tangents, But it's not like... There's nothing crazy in here, so I'm not saying that the conspiracy is batshit crazy. It just doesn't seem likely, given all these other things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're not trying to prove that the Earth is round here.
Right.
This is all human stuff, so it's not impossible.
And I really think, going back to it is human...
You can't prove it with science.
You can't prove it with science, but that's not what we're talking about. It's literally, this is a yes or no question, Matt. There is no science involved.
That's what I mean.
But you were going on a tangent about science now.
There's no science involved in this. It's either a lie or fact, one or the other. Someone's either lying or someone's telling the truth.
Right.
And if everyone's telling the truth...
But that's the thing, is that there are too many people involved for someone not to have slipped up. True. That is all this is.
That's what I'm saying. That's plausible.
That is not... You make less sense.
No.
All right. So you believe that he retired to go make Space Jam to make it a wonderful movie. 100%. I think that he retired because he was done
by Looney Tunes and forced to play basketball again. That's why he played basketball again.
And it reignited his flame and love for basketball.
Yes. Absolutely.
Well, okay. Well, with all that being said, that's going to do it today for Conspiracy Theory time on But Have You Heard About? As always, I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined by Matt.
Hello.
Matt,
goodbye.
Matt, who is definitely a little wasted today. Well, it's beautiful. But we both hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, morning, evening, week, whatever it may be. And have a good one. Bye.
Bye.